Okay, now we're going to start our new session, and this time we're going to talk about the dynasty which occupies the territory of modern day Iraq and western parts of Iran. And they were originally Mongols. We're talking about Chupanids, and they were descendants of a Mongol family of Suldus clan, and they came to power in 14th century in Persia. Uh, what what historiography knows about that?
Well, quite a bit. Always good to be with you again. There's we have quite a few sources on the Chobanids. They are kind of the boogeymen, if you like, of the late Mongol period in the Middle East. So there's rich information on the Chobanids in both the Mamluk literature from Syria and from Egypt, but also, of course, from the Persian, both late Ilkhanid and also the Timurid period. The Chobanids were a very prominent family at the end of the Ilkhanid period in Iran. Of course, as you mentioned, they're descended from sort of very illustrious ancestors. Their founder, Sorkhan Shira, was one of Chinggis Khan's earliest companions. He was responsible for saving Chinggis Khan's life. At one stage in the secret history of the Mongols, it's reported that Chinggis Khan was captured by his one-time or distant relatives, the Taichiut, and that Sorkhan.
Yeah, you got stuck. Hmm.
Recording stopped.
Yeah, can you repeat what you just said? Because we had the interruption, and we're
No
talking
problem.
about the origins of Chobanese or Chobanids dynasty in 14th century Persia.
Yes, that's right. So as I mentioned, the Chobanids are descended from one of Chinggis Khan's first and earliest companions, Sorkhan Shira, who was responsible for saving Chinggis Khan's life in his youth. Chinggis Khan was captured. He was taken hostage by some of his distant relatives, the Taichiut clan. Chinggis Khan managed to escape, and he was given sanctuary by Sorkhan Shira at great personal risk to himself and his family. And Chinggis Khan never forgot this service. When he became Khan, and Sorkhan Shira and his family, his sons and his daughter, came to join Chinggis Khan, they were given a special status of Tarkhan, which is a kind of a noble status. A Tarkhan, first of all, cannot be taxed. They are exempt from taxation. The same status was given to religious leaders throughout the Mongol Empire. So whatever profit they make, whatever money they make, they don't have to pay tax on it. Another very important benefit that they were given was that they were exempt from 9 crimes. Just imagine nowadays if you were given free license to commit 9 crimes. You know, what would you do? What kind of activity would you engage in to get ahead in life?
Yeah,
It's
it's a
really
nice proposal. It,
yeah.
it sounds it sounds like when mafia makes certain members of the lower ranks into higher rank mafiosos, so they
Yeah,
become a made man. and they had the
Made man,
license.
yeah.
Yeah, they have a license to rob, kill, and maltreat lower members of the criminal group. But of course, amongst made men, this type of activity has different consequences, and it's not so simple
Mm.
to wage the war against another clan or another made man or another capo di regime, etc., etc. So it's
Right.
similar to the concept of made man in Italian mafia.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, you're quite right. It's not always that simple, and I have to be honest with you. I mean, this is something that needs further research. But in all my reading, there are very few examples that I could point to of people who have been given this status who have actually committed crimes. I mean, technically, they're not crimes. They're violations of the traditional, I suppose, customary laws, the taboos, if you like, of society, and of course the Khan's yasa, his proclamations, and sort of his decrees. I find it very difficult to find, specific examples where a Tarkhan is listed as breaking any of these rules. No doubt it happens, but it's very rarely reported on. So, but anyway, I mean, it's a nice little perk to have, and we're told that his family were given pastures, animals, and control of people in what is nowadays northern Mongolia, in the area I guess in the Equatorial border between the steppe and the Siberian sort of tundra. So they become very, very wealthy as a result of their support of Chinggis Khan. And actually, the Chopanids are not even the main line of the Suldus lineage, as you quite rightly point out. Sorkhan Shira was a member of this family, the Suldus family or the Suldus clan. Chupan is he's not really one of the leading figures. Sorkhan Shira's one of his sons is appointed as one of the four main commanders in Chinggis Khan's army. His descendants go on to occupy positions of power virtually everywhere in the empire. They are sent to command armies and govern territories. A large number or a certain number of these Suldus, descendants of Sorkhan Shira, are sent to Iran, where they take part in the capture of Baghdad. One of their members is charged with the command of the right hand of Hulagu's army when they capture Baghdad. Um, Chupan is not part of this sort of main lineage. He's one of the descended from one of the younger brothers of a younger brother in Iran. So initially, his family isn't the most prominent member of this otherwise very important family, but he wins a name for himself. How else but in battle? His main claim to fame, and the reason that he becomes more important than any of his relatives, is he earns a reputation for extraordinary bravery in battle during the reign of Arghun Khan, who rules the Ilkhanate between 1284 and 1291. He takes part in wars with the Golden Horde to the north. He also plays a leading role in the wars against the Mamluks in Syria, in particular during the reign of Ghazan, where we know that at least three invasions of Sham, as it was then, were carried out. Not always very successfully. In one of these campaigns, the Mongol army was defeated by the Mamluk forces. They were forced to seek or take up a position on elevated ground, but where they were surrounded by the Mamluk forces before fighting their way out and beating a hasty retreat. The retreating Mongol army fled through a swamp where the Mamluks attacked and killed many of them. The remaining soldiers were forced to make their way back to Iran in a really ragtag kind of way, making them vulnerable to attack by bandits or by the pursuing vanguard of the Mamluk
You're
army.
talking
Now,
about the Battle of Ain Jalut.
no, 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 no.
Talking
So this
about
is
something
the Battle
else.
of. So this is much later than that. So
Yeah.
this is the Battle of Marj al-Safa. This takes
Okay.
place towards the end of Ghazan's rule at the beginning of the 14th century. So that, as you know, the Mongols try to attack and conquer Sham on several different occasions, and very rarely do they ever achieve any meaningful gain. This is one of their defeats. And Chupan distinguishes himself because, unlike the other commanders, he doesn't panic, he doesn't break rank, and he certainly doesn't flee back to Iran in great rush. He hangs behind to make sure that the soldiers who have lost their horses, the most vulnerable members of the army, are protected and are sort of given safe contact back to Iran. Again, he puts himself in personal danger to protect this army. And in the subsequent inquiry, when Ghazan, the Ilkhan, is furious at this defeat, he launches an inquest to find out who's responsible for this terrible blunder that takes place. And every commander in the army is ruled to have been culpable, to have been misbehaved, and to be responsible for this defeat, except for Chopan, who behaves bravely, who sort of is seen to adhere to all of the virtues that are expected of a Mongol soldier, to be brave, not to retreat, to basically risk his life in service to the Khan. And this sees him promoted very, very quickly at the end of Ghazan's reign, and then subsequently during the rule of Ghazan's brother Ul-Jaytu, and the latter's son Abu Sa'id. By the end of the Ilkhanate, under Abu Sa'id's rule, Chupan becomes the virtual ruler of the Ilkhanate. So Chupan, the last Ilkhan, Abu Sa'id, assumes the throne when he is still essentially a child. His father dies in 1316, and he's really only 13 years old or 12 years old, I think it is, when he takes power. So he's still only a boy. Chupan, therefore, is responsible for administering the Mongol Empire during Abu Sa'id's minority until he becomes an adult. And he uses this position of responsibility to parachute members of his family into important positions. One of his sons is appointed as the viceroy, or the governor, if you like, military governor of what is nowadays Turkey, or large parts of Turkey, Anatolia. Another one is appointed over the Transcaucasus, so the area around modern-day Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan falls under his control. There is another son that he sends off to Khorasan in eastern Iran. And then there is another son who is basically charged with taking care of the imperial court. And Chupan oversees the whole thing. So at the end of the Ilkhanid period, the Chupanids are in a position of great power until 1327, when a scandal takes place and Chupan is overthrown. I don't know if we have time, but it's a slightly juicy story. I mean, basically,
Yeah, we have
you know,
time.
perfect. Okay. Well, Chupan is overseeing Abu Sa'id's empire for him, and Abu Sa'id lives a life of leisure. He sort of receives an education. He's off writing poetry, enjoying life, hunting, banqueting. But and his one concern is that he falls in love with Chupan's daughter, who's called Baghdad Khatun. Um, Now the problem is that Chopan already married Baghdad Khatun to another member of the Mongol aristocracy, one of the leading families of the empire, the Jalayirids, who take over control of western Iran, of Iraq, after the Chupanids' decline. But he marries his daughter off to a member of that family. And Abu Said doesn't care. He wants to marry Baghdad Khatun, and he tells Chupan that he wants to do this. Well, Chupan says, "Well, what am I supposed to do? I've married off my daughter to someone else. What do you want me to do? Go find someone else. Go occupy yourself. Do something else. Take your mind off it." But Abu Said will not be put aside. He is infatuated with Baghdad Khatun, and Chupan keeps denying him this one request. Abu Said is absolutely furious with him. At one point, he tells Chupan, I've put all of the power, all of the wealth in the world into your hands, and you won't grant me this one request to marry your daughter. Um, this is a big problem for Chupan. And eventually, it is one of the causes that leads Abu Said to depose and overthrow him, and eventually kill him in the year 1327. Most of Chupan's sons suffer a similar fate, but his family remain important inside the Ilkhanate. They still have this kind of residual authority that survives Chupan's overthrow. But it is kind of, I mean, how frustrating for the poor guy. I mean, he's run the empire ever so well. Most of the sources have nothing but good things to say about his management. He's even-handed, sober, dedicated to his job. He's loyal to the Khan, by all accounts. But he just has this one problem, and he has this teenage Khan who is obsessed with his daughter and just can't get his mind off it. And so eventually, this is one of the causes that leads to his overthrow. And he's put to death in 1327. So this is the background to the Chupanid family.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you like me?
yeah, I'm listening to you. So, what happened later on with Chupan's successors? They took
Yeah.
over
So
parts of Mesopotamia and they established themselves as emirs.
right, you are. Yes. So of course, Abu Said marries Chupan's daughter, Baghdad Khatun, and this this creates an interesting situation. Abu Said has just killed her father. She's just killed off some of his brothers. But nevertheless, it means the Chupanids retain an important position in the empire. Almost immediately after Choban's death and the purge of his sons, other relatives take their place. One of Choban's daughters, Sati, or one of his sort of other daughters, Dilshad Khatun, also marries the Khan. So he has two daughters married to the Khan, and they are able to provide positions to other Chupanids to keep power. But I mean, part of their or they come to power after Abu Said's death in 1335. So Abu Said was traveling north. He'd received word that his empire was going to be invaded. He marched towards the Transcaucasus, the border with the Golden Horde, to confront the invading Jochid army, where we are told that he fell ill. Some sources say he fell ill. Some sources say that he was poisoned by Baghdad Khatun, who had become jealous of Dilshad Khatun. Anyway, I beg your pardon. Dilshad Khatun is not the daughter of Chupan direct. She's the
Yeah.
granddaughter. Sorry, I misspoke. Anyway, she becomes jealous. Supposedly, she may be responsible for murdering her husband Abu Said. But there is this residual power as the empire then implodes. Basically, there is no successor to Abu Said. He has no sons. There is no obvious successor. And so the Ilkhanate begins to sort of disintegrate. Various commanders try and take power in the pockets of the empire that they've been allocated to govern, and these commanders try and put their own puppet khans on the throne to rule the empire. There is a kind of virtual civil war that takes hold in the Ilkhanate, and the Chupanids are one of these major players in this civil war. Um, Basically it is Chopin's grandson, Hassan Kuchik, as he is called, or I would say Hassan the Lesser.
Yeah.
Um, would be the best way to translate Hassan Kuchik. I mean, literally, if you're going to translate it, it means little Hassan. But I don't think that's really how we should translate it. I think
No, it should be
Hassan
lesser
the Lesser.
because he's not little by his age and maybe physical composition.
Mm. No, no. I mean, so there is another Hassan who is at large, a descendant of the Jalayirids, the family. In fact, the man who Baghdad Khatun had been married to previously. Hassan the Elder, or Big Hassan, Hassan Senior, is the Jalayirid emir or commander. Hassan Kuchik is his I guess technically his junior in
Yeah,
age.
deputy.
But we have no information about it, sort of in terms of whether he's shorter or anything like that. But yeah, Hassan the Lesser. Anyway, he inherits his father's position. I mentioned before that Chupan had granted the governorship of some of these provinces in the Ilkhanate to his sons. One of his sons, Timurtash, is appointed to govern in Anatolia, and he builds up a sort of very interesting coalition to support his rule there. He is part of a new generation of Mongol rulers who have converted to Islam, and so he has not only close relations with the Turco-Mongolian nomadic elite of the Ilkhanate, he also has very close relations with the ulama, the kind of religious experts and office holders of Anatolia. Um, in fact, he goes so far as to claim that he is the Mahdi. Probably not the Mahdi in kind of Shiite terms or Alid terms. He thinks of himself as a kind of mujaddid. He is the reviver of Islam in Anatolia, as Jonathan Brack has pointed out. Anyway, he builds up a tremendous reputation for himself in Anatolia as a pious, just ruler, and he wins a sort of cross section of support from the nomadic population to the urban population and also amongst the religious elites. Hassan Kuchik is the son of Timurtash, and so he draws on his father's reputation to basically make a bid for power himself. He's rather a remarkable character. I mean, unfortunately, as we all know, history is written by the winners, and Hassan Kuchik's family don't end out winning the struggle for the succession in the Ilkhanate, but they make a very good bid of it. And Hassan Kuchik tries to use his father's former reputation and his supporter base to lay claim to power. In 1337, he pretends. He's very cunning. I mean, Hassan Kuchik he's about 10 years old when his father dies in 1327. So by the time Abu Sa'id dies in 1335, he's about 17 years old. So when he's 19 years old, he starts making a bid for the throne. It's rather remarkable. I mean, we have to keep reminding ourselves how young some of these rulers were. They're still teenagers, some of them. Some of them are in their early 20s, but so probably not qualified to occupy high office nowadays. But Hassan Kuchik is a young man, but he's incredibly cunning. He is incredibly conniving, and so he hatches or he lands on this plot to take one of his father's former slaves, who looks remarkably like his father, and say, "Up, My father's actually alive. He wasn't killed off. He's actually alive, and we're going to take over the empire in his name. And people fall for it. He has one of his father's former servants come and identify him, and this former servant can't tell the difference. He has his mother married to this former slave just to make it convincing. She is kind of forced into his harem to sort of legitimate himself. So he's very conniving, very cunning, and he uses this false Timurtash to rally his father's former supporters. He draws upon them to conquer or advance on the former Ilkhanid core territories and to seize control of Tabriz. Where he builds a power base for his family and where they rule between 1337 until 1357. So a period of roughly 2 decades. The Chupanids are kind of the main power brokers, or they are in control of the heartland of the former Ilkhanate, which, as you mentioned, includes parts of Anatolia, certainly eastern Anatolia, the area around modern-day Erzurum, Erzincan, Sivas. These kinds of areas are sort of well under Chupanid control. The plains of Mush, even to the west of Lake Van, northern Iraq, the Jazeera is kind of constantly being harassed by the Chupanids, and of course Western Iran. So Azerbaijan, sort of the parts of sort of near the Alborz Mountains, these kinds of areas are under the Chupanids' control. Do you want me to just keep going and
Yes.
hello?
Yeah. I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you want to add something else about successes of uh, of Chupan?
well,
What
I mean, they're
how
sure.
they
I mean,
collapsed? How
how
they
they collapse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
I mean,
happened with
they're
them?
a fascinating group. I mean, part of the reason that I find the Chobanids so interesting is because they're so scandalous, because they hold power for only 2 decades. The history of the Chobanids is written by their successors, the Jalayirids, and they have nothing nice to say about Hassan Kuchik. They have nothing nice to say about his brothers. Who take power from him. Hassan Kuchik is kind of famous for plotting and intrigue. So shortly after he takes power in Tabriz, an army is sent to take it from him. There are numerous contenders. As I mentioned, Hassan Bozorg is one, this representative of the Jalayrid family. There is a Khan who has taken control in eastern Iran. He also tries to come and take control of Tabriz from Hassan Kuchik, who has a much smaller army. But the one thing he does have is his brains. He's very, very cunning. And so he manages to play off these two adversaries against one another. He writes to Hassan Bozorg and he says, "Well, look, I mean, why don't we make an alliance against this Eastern enemy, and I'll sort of support you in whatever way I can. I'll help you take control of Tabriz." And Hassan Bozorg, who is not very bright. He's not very intelligent. He is married, in fact, to Dilshad Khatun after Abu Said's death. So he also relies very heavily on Chupanid support to keep his own position, and he's easily played by what I regard to be a much smarter opponent in Hassan Kuchik. Hassan Bozorg says, "Yeah, why not? Let's gang up on the eastern this Eastern Khan." And so, what does Hassan Kuchik do? He takes the message that he receives from Hassan Bozorg and sends it to the Khan in Khorasan and says, "Oh, look, you're the person you were hoping was going to join forces with you has turned against you, and he's on my side now. You can't trust him. You can't trust anybody in Western Iran. Look at the place, and this precipitates the withdrawal of this Eastern army. Chupan is left now with Hassan Buzurg, who is easily able to take care of, and he sort of retains control of Tabriz. He's a vicious politician. He kills off his own family members when he finds it expedient. Some of his cousins get in his way, he bumps them off. He appoints some of them, those of them who are willing to support him, he appoints them to positions around the empire, again, in southern Iran, in Fars, in Shiraz. He appoints a relative down there. He doesn't really do a very good job there and returns to Hassan Kuchik appealing for more help. Hassan Kuchik takes advantage of his weakened position to kill him. So he's not a very pleasant figure. Eventually, he's murdered by his own wife in the harem, or so we're told. So, I mean, it is really just a kind of a brilliant story. He is a perfect villain character, if you
Yeah,
like, a larger.
the whole characters sound very Machiavellian. The whole dynasty sounds very short-lived and Machiavellian.
Absolutely. And I am in no doubt, that this is largely embellished by his successors.
Yeah,
Um, and so we can't trust absolutely everything that is said about him. Yes, he's probably very wily, very cunning, but that's politics, right? I think Rashid I was just reading, I'm writing an article at the moment on regicide in the Mongol Empire, and I was rereading a passage from Rashid ad-Din, that this famous historian of the Mongol period in the Middle East, and he writes that anyone who has designs for power or who wants to become king must wash their hands generously in blood. And Hassan Kuchik certainly does that. He's probably not remarkable in that regard, but he's just very good at playing the political game. But eventually, there is a rumor that circulates that one of his wives is having an affair with one of his commanders. Um, they believe that Hassan Kuchik has heard this rumor, and so his wife decides to assassinate him when he comes to the harem. I believe actually he goes to the baths. It might be the baths, not the harem. And she has herself and her other female slaves wait for him, and then they'll attack him when he comes into the baths. Anyway, so he suffers a
this
very
is how
dramatic.
Agamemnon was killed by his unfaithful wife.
Right, right. I mean,
We have
it's
this motive in different traditions and different
right.
historical epochs.
I mean, I think in the Mongol Empire, certainly, one's household is not always a safe place to be. If you're going to be murdered, the Khans and their commanders, they have bodyguards around them all the time, right?
Of
They
course.
have so, these bodyguards, they will lie around the tent of their master to make sure that nobody gets inside, to kill them. So they're very, very diligent. What this means is that, the killer has to be inside, an inside job, right? And it's often the wives have some kind of involvement. They are part of a different faction. Their relatives might benefit from bumping off the Khan, or at least there is this perception. And so wives are often accused of murdering their husbands in the Mongol Empire, but as you mentioned, in other times in Islamic history as well, uh, the harem is not always the safest place. Uh, anyway, so he is killed, and there is then a fight for the succession. One of his, excuse me,
Yeah, go ahead.
is one of his brothers, Malik Ashraf, manages to take his place. Um, he's as ruthless as Hassan Kuchik. He just isn't as intelligent. Mal Malik Ashraf is paranoid, probably with good reason, because
Of
Hassan
course.
Kuchik is so good at killing off his relatives. So Malik Ashraf is completely paranoid. He surrounds himself with a personal guard made up largely of his own slave soldiers, or these Mamluks, these manumitted slaves that he has purchased. Because of course, Anatolia is one of the main arteries for the slave trade between the Kipchak steppe, or the Dashti Kipchak, this kind of area around between modern day Ukraine and Kazakhstan, where
Yeah.
the Mamluk Empire derives most of its military slaves. Well, the Chupanids kind of control a big part of that slave trade. And so Malak Ashraf builds himself a kind of inner cohort of slaves who he thinks he can trust. But he treats them so badly that even half of them don't sort of see him as being a reasonable ruler. Now, again, a lot of what is said about Malik Ashraf is probably exaggerated. We're told that he takes a Chinggiside prince and puts him on the throne, giving him the title of Anushirvan, this kind of famous Iranian title for emperors. But he locks him in a cage like a bird, or so we are told. Um, Kind of tormenting this poor prince. Um, we're told that he takes over Tabriz, that he builds up one suburb in Tabriz, and that he's so paranoid that he has his officials come to serve him during the day, and then he forces them to leave this suburb in the night because he can't trust any of them. Um, he's kind of a monster of a person. Half of his, as I say, half of his slaves sort of rebel against him. Now, there are other factors at play that might make him unpopular. We know that his rule coincides with the arrival of the plague in Iran. Huge fatalities across not only Iran, but across the Islamic world as a whole, and of course Europe, everywhere basically, suffers these terrible sort of deaths. Tabriz is uninhabitable for long periods of time. Malik Ashraf is unable to enter his own capital but for fear of catching the plague. He doesn't, but this creates a crisis that we see in other parts of the Mongol Empire. They lose their population, they lose their revenue base, and it's no longer possible to govern reasonably. Malik Ashraf, as I say, half of his subjects have died off. He doesn't have anyone to collect taxes from. And so he extorts his remaining subjects for more and more money to keep him in power. And they eventually complain to the Khan of the Golden Horde, Jani Bey. And Jani Bey seizes this opportunity to lead an army south in the year 1356. The Juchids, the rulers of the Golden Horde, had always argued that the Transcaucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, both modern day Azerbaijan, the Republic of Azerbaijan, and what is sort of northwestern Iran, the area around Tabriz. They always argued that this should have been part of their empire. And Jani Bey is able to occupy Tabriz, seize Malik Ashraf, who is abandoned by his supporters, and eventually put him to death. And this is effectively the end of the Chupanid dynasty, a very brief but important period in the history of the Ilkhanate.
Do you want to say something for the end, or
Oh, I think we probably there's not much time, right? If I
I'll
was to begin a new,
I'll send you the new link.
okay,
Yeah, I'll send you another link.
okay.
Now, so what happened with the Chupanids in 15th and 16th centuries?
Well, 15th and 16th centuries, I mean, the Chupanids are really not around anymore. The
Were
soldiers,
they outrooted, completely annihilated, or what happened with them?
pretty much
Yeah.
after 1357, some of the Chupanids managed to escape. Some of them escaped to the Golden Horde in the north on the Kipchak steppe, where they continue to serve in the army of the Juchids for some time. But eventually they're put to death. There are pretenders that try to seize power in Iran again, but they're very quickly eliminated. There are some of Chupan's former slaves who are remain important in Sham. So when Chupan's son Timurtash well, when Chupan was overthrown, one of his sons, Timurtash, sought asylum in the Mamluk Sultanate. He brought a cohort of his own supporters with him, including his own slaves, some of whom he gifted to Sultan al-Nasr, who either gifted or took control of. Anyway, these they're called Timurtashi slaves in the Mamluk sources. They play some role in the history of al-Nasr's sultanate after his death. They contribute to some of the problems, some of the instability there, but this is sort of a short-term impact. Um, the Suldus family continue to be, or the clan, if you like, continue to be important in Central Asia. They continue to be important in East Asia, but these are very, very distant relatives of the Chupanids. They're not Chupanids. They're not descendants of Chupan. So the Chupanids are pretty much they disappear. It is possible that some sort of very sort of peripheral members of the family, maybe former servants of the Chupanids, are taken and reincorporated into the Timurid Empire later on, but none of Chupan's descendants are really able to make a bid for power after 1357. That really is the end for the Chupanids, who are replaced by the Jalayirids after the Jochid army withdraws. And I guess you're asking for final words later on. I mean, it's a very short period of time that the Chupanids are in real control. After Abu Sa'id's death, it's 2 decades from 1337 until 1357, not including the time that Chupan himself, of course, ran the empire. Um, but I think their real significance is in the coalition that they put together. The army, the supporter base that they managed to build for themselves really speaks to the way that the Ilkhanate had transformed over the 13th and 14th centuries. It's a supporter base, as I say, that is made up of Turco-Mongolian nomads. It is a base that includes urban elites. They managed to cultivate close relations with the ulama. They managed to set up pious foundations in Tabriz and parts of eastern Anatolia, which win them some limited support. And they also have their slave contingent, and they have the support of some urban militias as well. The point is that the army that they build for themselves is a mix. It's not just a Mongol army. It's not just an army of Turco-Mongolian nomads. It's a mixed army of nomads, of often Persian-speaking, in some cases literate, in some cases not, people who had been displaced by the original Mongol invasion. The army is Islamized. Timurtash considers himself to be a kind of formidable leader in the Islamic world. And perhaps his son Hassan Bozorg tries to do likewise. It has been speculated that Malik Ashraf also tries to model himself not just on Mongolian models of kingship or sort of leadership, but he also tries to build a reputation for himself as a supporter of the Safaviya Sufi order. He tries to model his rule on the earlier kind of mirror for princes literature. He tries to build himself up as a kind of Persian-style monarch, not just as a Mongol. So we see sort of Iran in the High Middle Ages really taking shape. Iran at this point in its time is a rich mixture of Persian influences, of Islamic influences, and of Turco-Mongolian influences as well, amongst other things. But it is a very complicated inheritance that the Ilkhanate bequeaths to Iran. Yeah.
How the local population uh, dealt with the Mongol dynasties in Persia.
Which population? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm talking about the majority of people who live there, Persian population,
Yeah,
Arab
yeah,
population,
yeah.
because we had a mixed population of Persians and Arabs. Even today in Iran, we have a big
Oh,
Arab minority, and back then we also
yeah,
had Arab, Turkish, and Persian populations.
yes,
How,
yes,
how they
quite right.
consider them? Did they consider them as occupiers and some kinds of upstarts, or
Mm. I think it's more complicated. I think it's very, very difficult, to get a sense of what a common person thinks is very, very difficult. What we have is what the literary class has left behind for us. And I think opinions of the Mongols vary over time. Initially, of course, the shock of the conquest is tremendous, and I think it leaves a very heavy mark on a lot of people who lived through the conquest. Those who are lucky enough to survive it. This is a very traumatic event for a lot of people. Um, However, in terms of viewing the Mongols, are they seen as outsiders? Probably not at all. You have to keep in mind that the dynasty that preceded the Mongols in many parts of Iran was the Khwarezm Shah Empire. The Khwarezm Shahs are Turkic slaves of the former Seljuks. Their main military force is derived from the Kipchak steppe. So again, a kind of sort of outside army of soldiers from Central Asia. So there's really no sign that the Mongols are any more foreign than the Khwarezm Shah. Before the Khwarezm Shah Empire, you have the Seljuks.
yeah,
They're seen as by a lot of Iranians, certainly the Iranians in that were ruled by the former Buyid dynasty in Iraq and in Western Iran, they're sort of it's quite a shock to the system, yes. But so the Mongols are perhaps not seen as being so foreign. The main objection to the Mongols is that they're not Muslims. The
yeah.
Seljuks were Muslims, the Khwarezm-Shah were Muslims. The Mongols weren't at first. Um,
At first, because
but
many of them converted to Islam.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And many of them convert very, very quickly. Not always, this is not always reflected at the center of the empire, at the imperial court where Hulagu is based. But, that's removed, that's in the steppe. But the Mongols send out representatives to govern in the provinces, and these provincial officials, these governors, these tax officials, they're a minority in the area that they rule. They can only govern by building networks with religious officials, with local landowners and aristocrats, through connections with town leaders, the ayar, right?
yeah,
Um, it's through these connections that they're able to govern, and so these provincial sort of Mongol officials convert much faster than the Mongols at the capital, and so it's very likely that the Mongols, integrate very fast. So we have one of the sort of earliest authors to write on the Mongols in Iran is not actually a historian as we would think of it. It is the poet Sadi Shirazi in Fars in Shiraz. Sadi, his career coincides with the early Mongol invasion, but also the rule of Hulagu and the rule of Abaka, the very first Ilkhans. Um, And initially, he talks about the trauma that the Mongol invasion causes. He writes a poem where he sort of claims that he speaks to a man who has witnessed the Mongol invasion and who fought against the Mongols. And he describes him suffering a kind of ongoing, lingering trauma as a result of that invasion. But then later on, he goes on to write a series of ghazals praising the Mongol officials that are sent to govern Shiraz because they impose order on the chaos. Um, and there is this sense, after the Mongols are gone, there is this nostalgia for the Mongols that takes over. It's not that anybody has any particular affection for the Mongols, you
Yeah,
understand. I mean, there is a certain amount of cynicism and common sense, I think, in most of the historical writing that we see. These authors are not idiots, but when chaos takes over, when the one thing that the Mongols do bring for a certain period of time is a degree of predictability and stability. And when Abu Said dies and these various commanders that have been appointed to the provinces start fighting amongst themselves and competing to try and seize power, this causes instability. When the plague comes, it causes instability and an economic decline, and a new kind of crisis sets in. And so there is this peculiar kind of nostalgia for the Mongol period that takes hold. We have a number of authors that write in the 30 years after Abu Said's death, when Iran is divided into a patchwork of warring states. And they say, this was one of the great empires that has ruled over Iran, that we're not going to see rulers like this for a long time. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Mongols were remarkable rulers, but there is a legacy in the historiography of Iran, this kind of, as I say, nostalgia. The people miss the stability of the Mongols during the 14th century, and this perhaps manifests itself in the rise of Amir Timur or Tamerlan.
yeah.
Um, he inherits a lot of his historians from Iran, and they bring this nostalgia for the Mongol rule over to the Timurids, and they portray Timur. In fact, they probably don't need to portray him. Timur portrays himself as being a kind of reviver of the old Mongol Empire. But by that point, as I say, it's completely transformed. The new sense of what Chinggiside rule is of an Islamic rule, one where most of the officials write in Persian, where the leadership speak Turkic. It's a very different place or a very different type of rule to the one that Chinggis Khan had introduced at the beginning of the 13th century.
Thank you so much. We're going to continue our conversations. I wish you a good day. Also, I wish myself a good and safe day because we are now in the middle of the military conflict between Israel and Iran, and we'll see how things will develop. Today is my off day,
Sorry?
but
Yes.
I'm working today because
Yeah.
of the political situation and escalation between Israel and Iran. We may have further escalation because we expect the barrage
Mm.
from both sides. So hopefully nothing major will happen, but this is how it is, and this escalation lasts
Yeah.
for a long time, not only for 2 years or 10 years. It's been like this for a few decades, or I would say 120 years. I wish you all the best, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yes, yes. I wish you all the best. I wish you yeah, safety and security. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Take care. All the best. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.